Andate a casa, non c'è nulla da fare. 25 anni fa, una diagnosi di distrofia muscolare di Duchenne.
È vero che i miei muscoli diventano sempre più deboli.
Una patologia degenerativa rara che colpisce i muscoli. Ma c'è chi non si arrende e fonda Parent Project. Intanto il mondo cambia e anche Parent Project cambia un po' il mondo.
Grazie a Parent Project del nuovo
dall'ultimo anno finanziato da Parent Project.
È un project che ha circa 8 anni, è la prima volta che in maniera...
I pazienti oggi hanno un futuro da immaginare, degli obiettivi da raggiungere e dei traguardi da conquistare. Oggi, anche con la Duchenne puoi diventare ciò che vuoi. Come
Luca Buzzella, che ringrazio per essere con
Morire insieme, in fin dei conti, è una sfida già vinta.
I'm here to tell the future is there.
Jacopo,
alla Duchenne.
Matteo, Lorenzo, Luca, Samuele, Francesco e come tanti altri ragazzi che vivono una vita piena. Ma questo non basta, non c'è ancora una cura e tanti sono gli ostacoli da superare e le strade da aprire.
Tutti insieme abbiamo formato una grande famiglia.
Scrivi i prossimi 25 anni di storia insieme a noi.
Benvenuti, bentornati. Siamo arrivati al terzo giorno della nostra 18ª conferenza internazionale sulla distrofia muscolare di Duchenne e Becker. Siamo qui anche oggi a darvi il benvenuto in diretta dai nostri studi situati in via De Francisci 36 a Roma, nella sede nazionale di Parent Project. Abbiamo allestito per
Parent Project. For this conference, we have reorganized our offices, turning them into TV studios. And we're here today also to make initially some announcements. First of all, you can have simultaneous translation both in Italian and English. And to choose the language, you must click on the icon interpretation that you can find on the Zoom bar low down, and you can choose either Italian or English. Once again, we wish to thank our interpreters for the work they did yesterday and the day before yesterday, and they'll be with us also tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday as well. And that is why we ask all speakers to speak slowly, to respect time limits, so that our interpreters can work more easily. I mean, the understanding each other is essential to the success of our event. It is possible to write questions in the Zoom space for Q&A. And now here we go, a new afternoon. And today, before starting the afternoon session, we have a special moment because we are going to introduce a new product. This new product is under the mark of Parent Project, and we are sure that you will like it very much as we did. It is a video animation for our families, but also for the whole community. And to introduce it from Rome and Vittoria in Sicily, we have our national president, Luca Genovese, and our Marica Pugliese. Luca needs no introduction for our community, and well, he has prepared this introduction, and so if you were not with us at the opening of the conference, I suggest you to go and look for it on the 17th, and instead of seeing live, well, you'll see, well, look at the recording. Luca is in his office in Vittoria, in in the Ragusa province in beautiful Sicily. He lives there with Franca and three kids, Marco, Matteo, and Marianna. Marco is 25, Matteo is 22, or rather the other way around, and Marianna is 18. Matteo and Marco are DMD patients. Luca met Parent Project in the year 2000, and since 2004 he has been a member of the Executive Council of our organization. He was National Vice President between 2006 and 2016, and since 2016 he has been our president. He has given a great contribution to the quality of life of our families, and his work has enabled Parent Project to give more stamina to this objective that is present in has been present in our association always. I mean, his presence, I said it also Wednesday, it is an example for all the families who met Duchenne, but also for all of us. And together with him, our Marika Pugliesi, she is one of the psychologists of the National Listening Center of Duchenne. Marika works together with Tiziana, Emanuela, Maria, and Nicole in the National Center, and she has been in Parent since 2013. Her professionalism for the families, but also, let's say, for all of us, is something we all appreciate, and she's really a great asset for our families. Marika has also developed a great experience in supporting our patients, both the young ones and those who are not so young, and also supporting patients in clinical trials. And now I give you the floor and for introducing our new product. Thank you, Cristina. Thank you for this introduction. Well, yes, before starting the session, we'd like to start thinking exactly what it means taking part in a trial and moving from the experience of our president, because he has had this experience quite a few times. You and your kids have taken part in a number of trials. What was the impact with informed consent? Well, yes, first of all, thank you, and good afternoon. I mean, trials are really very emotional. My first trial was in 2008, and it was the first time that they were speaking about trials on men. I had attended some 8 international conferences of Parent Project, and we saw just mice and preclinical trials. So there was also an enthusiasm also in the association itself when that first trial started. And so the whole family went along. We've always tried to turn these things into a sort of small vacation. So we were also willing to make a biopsy. My second son hadn't got to do it at the moment of diagnosis. And so for him, that was the first biopsy. The informed consent, well, I'd rather define it as a foggy consent, a consent made foggy by enthusiasm, by this emotion. And so we underrated, ex post, we can say that, informed consent must be approached with greater awareness. Informed consent is something that is always very technical, but we trust physicians, we trust doctors, and appropriately so, because testing, investigating also means that even investigators have no certainties. Still, you must be aware of what you are doing. And the other important thing, you must also be aware that you are not going there to get a drug. medication. No, because you may also be in the placebo arm, and we don't know anyway what the effects of the drug may be. So if you participate in a trial, you must do it with caution and maybe with slightly less enthusiasm than we had in 2008. But we were at our first experience, and so we were super enthusiastic. Thank you, Luca. What were the most difficult moments in this experience of yours? Well, quite a few. When I say that there was really a thunderstorm of emotions, well, there were good ones and bad ones. And I believe that is inevitable, that is unavoidable. When our children participated in our trials, in some cases, their names were taken from the patient's registrar, and in other cases, out of clinicians' invitation. And I'd like to say something about that. It is very important to be cooperative with clinicians when they identify the families. Of course, of course, they also have to judge the children's compliance, but also, if the families are able to participate in the trial. So the most difficult moment, as I mentioned before, was the moment of biopsies, because of course it is an invasive treatment. At the moment of diagnosis 20 years ago, I had imagined other types of intervention. Some people referred to surgery on the spine, but luckily the clinical story tells us that now these interventions are quite rare. So, all in all, the biopsy was in fact the most invasive type of intervention my children ever had. Now we know that there are trials and studies going on to find other indicators to understand whether the trial has been successful or not, because normally biopsies used to be done before and after the trials, but now maybe this is no longer that necessary. And of course, there is an impact on the personal and professional life. One trial went on for a few months, and we had to go once a week to Messina, but from Vittoria to Messina it's 200 kilometers and the roads are not very good. And I really appreciate the famous 3 days off duty guaranteed by the Italian legislation. But these 3 days were never enough, because in a month there are 4 weeks. So we had to find different solutions to find 4 days. The impact is huge, the effort is huge, but we must say that essentially companies, when there are these trials, companies also foresee contributions. There are also very generous contributions to the families, but of course your life is turned upside down, and then there are some side effects. Marco still is bothered about it. For example, that he still has ugly cavities in the body precisely where these injections were being made, and the cavities are still there. Is not happy about that. As nobody would. Sure. Well, what were your expectations before this experience, before this trial experience? Well, now, exposed, I might say, there is a big difference between the technical and scientific expectation of a trial. The expectations of researchers, what they consider as the primary goal of the trial. For families, even a slight slowing down of muscle degeneration could be considered as a good result. But sometimes this assessment is not identical to that of researchers, and that is why, you are exposed to disappointment, because of course, there is a psychological aspect, and that is why they also do these trials with a placebo arm, because you imagine results are going to be there. But the other aspect that was for us a reason for disappointment, for example, when one of these trials was discontinued, well, they didn't even tell us what was the reason why, and also the personal findings, the personal data of our children were not made available. And that, I mean, should be something that the families should get. And so apart from the informed consent, I think you should have a sort of covenant between companies and families, telling families, well, at least you will have a file, you will have a wealth of information to help you understand a bit more about your children's disease. This did not happen, and we are very sorry about that, because of course the disappointment increases. I mean, when a trial, of course, is discontinued with no explanation and no information provided to the families. So after what you told us, what was the motivation behind your willingness to go on with trials? Well, that is something anyone can easily understand. When there is a pathology such as muscle dystrophy, such as DMD, and the severity of the disease, of course, your approach, your outlook is different. You want to try everything. You try to catch on to anything. And I believe this element is essential. This is what really is the big driver for all those who participate in trials. And then there is another essential aspect for to carry out scientific research. Well, you not only need money, of course, you need a lot of money as well, but you must also have the possibility. I mean, you must also have patients willing to participate in trials. So if our approach were to be, well, we don't want to risk anything, we don't want to participate, of course, research would not be able to move forward. So if we want research to move forward, we must cooperate, we must participate, because otherwise that would be only lip service to research, but not real support. You cannot possibly have a zero risk research. And also on the basis of the information we receive. I've mentioned a side effect, something not very nice for my son, but really not severe side effects. We have never heard about severe effects, severe side effects, apart from really a few exceptions. So that is what statistics always have. So you must be cooperative. Another trial we participated in, we knew perfectly that we were in the control group, and still we went to Milan once a month with Marco, and we did that for quite a few months. Of course, we were we were provided with everything to cover our expenses, but you must have that approach, because if they need a control group, someone must be in the control group. So whoever can do that, well, should be willing to do it. Research is not helped simply by giving 100 euro or 1,000 euro. It's not just a matter of money. And so I'm absolutely convinced of that. And I'd like to invite the whole community to have a proactive approach. Our clinicians are very humane, they are very helpful. So when clinicians believe that trials can be accepted, you must say yes for our children, but also for those who come after us. You must have this forward-looking outlook, because otherwise it's very difficult to imagine that research can move forward despite all the disappointments that are part and parcel of the story. Thank you, Luca, for what you said, because you underlined many criticalities linked to the participation to a clinical trial. As a listening center over the year, we have had the opportunity to work with many families that were involved in clinical trials, also with support services. And that has enabled us to start thinking about the many aspects linked to participation and awareness. First of all, therapeutical misunderstanding. So the difficulty at understanding the difference between the goals of a research and treatment. And so you misunderstand a clinical trial, thinking that a clinical trial may have a therapeutic objective. Of course, there is a psychological and emotional approach and linked to the expectations of families and patients. And some families, despite the communication made by clinicians, think about trials as a possibility of cure. So people want absolutely to be enrolled, or they're not truly aware of the risks or possible side effects, and they live with anger and disappointment, possible interruptions or progression of the signs of the disease. Parents imagine the trial as a possibility to slow down the progression of the disease. This is sometimes described as an objective and final goal of the trial. So in this case, the awareness is different and people can accept the results more readily. The trial is also lived as a possibility of improving the quality of life of children and young men. And so having the possible benefits of trials, possibly these benefits won't go only to your own children, and the participation is similar to a sort of lending yourself to science. And that leads us to this project of video animation. The objective of this project is supporting the families in the difficult choice of participating or not to a clinical trial, trying to make them aware of what a clinical trial really is. Now the video can start. Thank you.
Avete mai considerato di far partecipare Leo a un trial, uno studio clinico? Si tratta di una ricerca, sì, una ricerca medica, che serve a comprendere se un farmaco può essere utile per trattare una patologia.
Quindi non è una cura?
No, però è un passaggio fondamentale nella ricerca di nuove terapie. È l'unico modo per stabilire se un trattamento ha un effetto sulla patologia, se è da preferire a un altro e se è sicuro per la salute dei pazienti. Il percorso di sviluppo di un farmaco è lungo, può durare fino a 10 o 12 anni e può interrompersi se il trattamento non risulta efficace o se ci sono effetti collaterali inattesi. Inizia con esperimenti in provetta o su cellule e prosegue nei modelli animali. Se i risultati sono positivi, si passa alla valutazione nei pazienti attraverso i trial clinici, articolati in 3 fasi nelle quali va trovata la risposta a una o più domande via via più complesse.
Ora mi è più chiaro, ma che vantaggi avrebbe Leo dalla partecipazione?
Allora, tenete presente che se il farmaco si rivelasse efficace, partecipando al trial, Leo potrebbe beneficiare prima di un trattamento innovativo e il suo stato di salute sarebbe costantemente monitorato da medici specializzati esperti nella patologia. Partecipare a un trial vuol dire anche aiutare la ricerca, perché a prescindere dall'esito, le conoscenze sulla patologia migliorano, portando un beneficio a tutta la comunità di pazienti.
Sì, certo, ogni conoscenza in più è preziosa, ma quali rischi ci possono essere per la salute di nostro figlio?
Dobbiamo sempre avere in mente che uno studio clinico è un esperimento. Non è garantito che dia gli effetti sperati e c'è la possibilità di effetti collaterali. Anche se la salute del paziente viene sempre al di sopra di tutto ed è tutelata con controlli clinici frequenti e approfonditi, bisogna tenere in considerazione questo rischio. E va considerata anche la possibilità che nel corso del trial si assuma il placebo al posto del trattamento.
Sì, ne ho sentito parlare, ma non so bene come funzioni.
Certo, vi spiego meglio. Spesso uno studio clinico divide i partecipanti in 2 gruppi. Tutti i pazienti fanno gli stessi esami e visite, ma mentre quelli di un gruppo ricevono il trattamento, gli altri, il gruppo di controllo, ricevono un trattamento simile nell'aspetto, ma che non contiene il farmaco. E questo è necessario per essere certi che i risultati raccolti dipendano veramente dal farmaco e non da altre variabili.
Quindi come funziona il reclutamento?
Beh, i pazienti che partecipano a un trial devono costituire un gruppo omogeneo. Quindi, per farvi capire, oltre all'età, ai farmaci assunti e in alcuni casi il tipo di mutazione, occorre anche verificare che tutti abbiano alcune caratteristiche cliniche comuni attraverso esami del sangue, prove motorie e altre valutazioni. Noi medici, inoltre, dobbiamo capire se a livello pratico il paziente e i familiari possono sostenere questo impegno. A volte un bambino o un ragazzo non viene scelto ed è normale sentirsi delusi. Ma non bisogna mai dimenticare che questo rigore è importante per ottenere risultati chiari e accedere al più presto al possibile trattamento. Quando il parere è positivo, il medico leggerà insieme alla famiglia il consenso informato, un documento che spiega le finalità dello studio, i tempi, come funzionerà, i possibili rischi e gli aspetti organizzativi. Ci sono tante cose da capire bene prima di firmare questo documento e iniziare il trial. Per esempio, bisogna sapere se partecipando a un certo trial si perde la possibilità di accedere ad altri studi in futuro.
Ci sono tanti aspetti da valutare. Non è una decisione facile.
Dobbiamo capire se possiamo farcela a livello pratico. Dovremo prendere dei giorni dal lavoro e Leo dovrà saltare dei giorni di scuola. Poi bisogna capire gli effetti della terapia nella vita di tutti i giorni.
E dovremo discuterne bene con Leo. Per fortuna abbiamo già parlato un po' con lui della patologia. Il consenso informato lo dovremo firmare noi e anche lui. Leggendolo ci farà tante domande. Dovremo essere sicuri che se la senta.
Forse potremmo anche parlare con una famiglia coinvolta in un trial. Chiamiamo Parent Project. Loro ci possono dare dei consigli per decidere e ci aiuteranno a confrontarci con altre famiglie.
Quindi esistono diversi modi di assumere il trattamento?
Sì, dipende dal trial. In alcuni casi si prende una pastiglia o uno sciroppo a casa, in altri il farmaco viene somministrato una o più volte nel centro clinico.
E poi mi hanno detto che dovrò andare a fare tante visite.
Sì, di solito si passa una giornata nel centro clinico e si fanno una dopo l'altra le varie visite, insieme a un genitore. Per darvi un'idea, possono essere prelievi di sangue, test funzionali, test come l'ecocardiogramma, la risonanza magnetica o anche una biopsia muscolare. Nella biopsia muscolare viene fatta una leggera anestesia e poi un piccolo taglio sul braccio o sulla coscia per prelevare e analizzare una parte di muscolo. Al risveglio ci saranno dei punti e si può sentire un po' di fastidio. La risonanza magnetica invece è una specie di fotografia generale di tutti i muscoli del corpo, fatta dentro a una macchina, simile a una navicella spaziale, dal rumore forte, nella quale occorre restare fermi. Qualche volta la giornata risulterà faticosa ed è bene portare con sé qualche passatempo.
Siamo preoccupati per il fatto che Leo perderà diversi giorni di scuola e anche noi con il lavoro ci dobbiamo organizzare.
Non dispiace perdere qualche giorno di scuola.
Sì, prima di decidere vi consigliamo di spiegare la situazione alla scuola e al datore di lavoro. Mamma e papà possono fare domanda per i permessi necessari per venire con te a fare le visite e gli insegnanti e i compagni possono aiutarti a non rimanere indietro.
Riguardo alle spese abbiamo dei dubbi. Ci sono dei rimborsi?
Sì, di norma è previsto il rimborso di tutte le spese legate al trial, come viaggio, vitto, alloggio. Ecco, potrebbe accadere che vi venga chiesto di anticipare queste spese, che poi vengono rimborsate, mentre in altri casi c'è un sistema di organizzazione che provvede a tutto.
E se avremo dei dubbi potremo parlare con lo staff che segue lo studio, vero?
Assolutamente sì. Sarà bene parlare con l'equipe, sia voi sia Leo, quando vi verranno dei dubbi o delle domande da fare. Potrebbe venirvi voglia di capire se Leo sta assumendo il farmaco oppure il placebo o se il farmaco stia facendo effetto. È normale volere queste risposte, ma riguardo a questo è necessario aspettare i risultati dello studio.
Per un genitore è normale avere speranze, come quella che il trial possa contribuire a rallentare un po' la progressione della patologia. Alcuni momenti possono essere vissuti con frustrazione, ad esempio se non si sono verificati miglioramenti o ci sono stati effetti collaterali o se i sintomi della patologia diventano più evidenti. A volte capita che un trial venga interrotto per motivi legati all'efficacia o alla sicurezza. Questo è sempre un momento delicato ed è normale provare rabbia e delusione. Anche se è difficile, bisogna sempre ricordare che il trial è un percorso di sperimentazione condiviso, che si affronta per aiutare a rendere disponibili nuove terapie in futuro.
Le emozioni, sia di Leo sia dei suoi genitori, sono importanti. Le aspettative, i timori, la fatica dei genitori possono influenzare molto il modo in cui lui vivrà questa esperienza. Alcuni bambini provano paura o ansia per alcuni aspetti delle visite o per i possibili effetti collaterali. Altri affrontano con relativa serenità questo impegno. Spesso la partecipazione al trial porta i pazienti a confrontarsi con la propria condizione, a porsi e porre delle domande. Un dialogo aperto su tutti questi temi aiuterà Leo a comprendere tutto ciò che sta vivendo.
Complimenti davvero al nostro staff che con attenzione e cura.
Well, I wish to congratulate our staff for this excellent video animation coming from the experience of our listening center and the scientific bureau have developed over the years close to families and patients. And also thanks to the fundraising area and the excellent work of the graphic Laura De Francesco and also an agency, Cattive Produzioni, that worked on the post-production of the video. This video would not have been possible without the contribution of pharmaceutical companies that have supported its making: Sarepta, Pfizer, Roche, Italfarmaco, Wave, Catalysis, all companies that we wish to thank first because they invest on the research on this disease, and also because with this partnership in a joint project, they show that they attribute importance to our association, psychological support, correct communication, and overall well-being of all those who want to participate in a trial. And I believe that that is something that can be shared by all the companies that share this mission, starting from this project. Thank you, Marika. And now we give the floor to the studio for introducing next session.
Bene, grazie davvero. Siamo certi che questo video circolerà moltissimo e aiuterà moltissimo.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure this video will be extremely helpful to all our families and our community. So before going into the heart of the matter, let me introduce you to our two co-chair women. Again, they need no introduction. Anyway, here is Fernanda De Andres, who is one of the best known people in our staff and possibly in the whole community, both in Italy and abroad. Actually, last month she celebrated her 10th anniversary as a parent project staff worker. She's a molecular biologist and is basically responsible for the association scientific unit as well as the patient registry. She works with Gloria, here she is, and also with Ilaria, who's sitting next to her. Actually, Fernanda has been mainly dealing with the relationship with the whole of the scientific community, but she's still working with families, and she is a very creative person. Sometimes she's so creative that we find it hard to stop her. But anyway, she is certainly responsible for much that reaches out to the whole DMD community. And then Ilaria. Ilaria has been working with us for almost 3 years. She's a genetic biologist as well as a writer. She chaired with Filippo Bucella yesterday's session about advanced therapies. So with Gloria and Fernanda, she is responsible for the scientific unit of our association, but she's currently involved in the patient registry, more specifically, one of the assets, if you wish, of our association. So Fernanda and Ilaria will be chairing the gene therapy session. Gloria will be following from her home. So please do use the Q&A chat portion to write your questions. Thanks a lot to our outstanding speakers. And now Ilaria has the floor. And again, thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thanks, Christina. It's a pleasure for us to be here with you again. Actually, many of you were already here yesterday and the day before yesterday. So some have even attended actually our sessions so far. Today, we're going to deal with another very important expectation of our families, that is updating on the current clinical trials. But we decided these sessions should be somewhat different this year. So we're going to certainly update you about the current clinical trials, but also we're going to hear about the clinical management of the disease, which is as important, of course, for patients and their families. So each one of the aspects regarding the multidisciplinary management of both DMD and BMD will be divided, will be, broken down in the different sessions. And for that, we have some very famous experts. So regarding today, Fernanda, up to you. Well, of course, we couldn't but start our session with talking about dystrophin. Dystrophin will actually play the leading role in our session, both in terms of its clinical management and also in terms of other aspects that concern it in any case. We know that whenever there's a dystrophin deficit, problems arise, as we know. Professor Mercuri will be dealing with this more specifically. Later on, we're going to keep talking about dystrophin, but in the framework of the novel gene therapies whereby dystrophin is supposedly restored. So now it's indeed a pleasure for me to give the floor to Professor Mercuri. Actually, last year regarding gene therapy, we produced a very nice cartoon. Well, cartoons, as Christina said, are very often used. And actually, with this cartoon, the approach of the gene therapy whereby dystrophin is restored in human muscles is included in a cartoon. Of course, this may make it sound very simple. It isn't, of course, but please, you can download it using the QR code. So Professor Mercuri is a professor of pediatric neuropsychiatry, and he works in Rome. We all know him. He is indeed a point of reference in this field, both in Italy and abroad. So it is our pleasure to have him here and give him the floor. You have the floor, Professor Mercuri.
Grazie Fernanda. Condivido il mio schermo. Allora, l'incarico che mi è stato dato oggi è di parlare. Si vede il mio schermo?
So, can you see the screen? Asks the speaker. No, actually, that is not the case.
Adesso?
What about now? Yes. Yes, the screen is now, the slides are now visible. So I have been asked to talk about the diagnosis of DMD and BMD. Actually, we know that this has been developing in years. We certainly have some diagnostic criteria. We've had them for a few years. However, there have been some developments that have also allowed us to fine-tune our diagnosis. And first of all, why should we talk about diagnosis in DMD or BMD? Well, obviously, to confirm that the diseases are there, all right, and have differences in terms of their, being more or less serious, but also because all therapies go through the identification of the specific gene defect. You will hear about this more in depth tomorrow. But also because we've seen that several mutations are associated to a different progression, to a different course of the disease, both regarding DMD and BMD boys. So up until the first years of the 21st century, this diagnosis mainly took place through muscular biopsy. Well, some tests, some different tests had been available for some time, but biopsy was mainly used. Then the most appropriate genetic tests have come to the surface and have changed the general orientation, so that today biopsy is mainly used in those situations where there may be a discrepancy between the clinical phenotype and the actual mutation, or else when we can't find a mutation. This is a graph that is based on the standards of care that have recently been updated. And as you can see, when we have ALT increases, this may be occasionally the case in both BMD and DMD boys, also maybe because of a family history, or else because of clinical signs such as frequent falls. So anyway, after that, we move to the first exam to the first test whereby CK is tested. CK is an enzyme that can be found in the muscle, and the muscle, once dystrophic, will pass CK on into the blood. So if we find high amounts of CK in the blood, then the second step should be made, not biopsy, as I have said, but the genetic tests to search for the particular dystrophin mutation. If you find a mutation, then it's DMD. Otherwise, you will have, as we'll see in a minute, to sequence the gene in a more appropriate way, and maybe muscular biopsy will come in the end. This dates back to this year. Well, it basically contains the same things, but maybe in a more detailed way about the genetic tests that must be carried out. I won't go into that much because, as I said, it will be the topic of tomorrow's session. Now, what happens when we have no ALTs or no family history for DMD? Well, Well, it may happen that the boys show some signs whereby they go to see a physician. They may have an abnormal gait, or else they have a hypertrophic calves. So whenever they're supposed to start running or jumping, difficulties arise, and then there may be some speech impairment and a more global growth stunting. Having said that, between the onset of such signs and the actual age of the diagnosis, the time of the diagnosis, we get a remarkable gap, from 2 to 4 years. So the delay often outweighs the actual age. So this is a study showing the fact that sometimes with the currently available tests, we may find signs, the mutations typically pertaining to either DMD or BMD. Here you see we may have deletions ranking first, and then duplications, otherwise the so-called small mutations. Of course, as tools have got better and finer, we may say that the presence of such a so-called small mutations is getting more and more relevant. So what about the time gap that I mentioned before? What about this topic in Italy? Well, we knew that that was also the case elsewhere in the world, so that people even talked about a failed early diagnosis. Well, then what about Italy? A multi-center team was set up. Dr. D'Amico, she's very good, and she is the head of this team. She's been working with different teams in basically all centers dealing with DMD boys in Italy, so that we have 14 centers participating, giving us data about several aspects, including, of course, the family history, as well as, of course, other relevant data. So it was on average around the age of 31 months that the first suspicion arose, but much later the diagnosis on average came up. However, the gap seemed to be lower than the one in the rest of the world. Then we tried to see whether we had been particularly good as physicians in recognizing the typical clinical signs, but we were quite disappointed because the early diagnosis was mainly due not to the goodness, if you wish, of physicians, not due to their specific skills, but because there had been a CK test that had showed this. The boys had probably undergone that test for other reasons, maybe because of vomiting or diarrhea. So maybe this is a test that is not usually carried out elsewhere in the world, or maybe because we usually submit, people to such tests in Italy. I mean, more often than anywhere else. But that was the actual reason. Otherwise, in some cases, even after the 4th year of age, the diagnosis was made. So in Italy, on average, our diagnosis time is a bit earlier than elsewhere in the world, but it's late anyway. Let me stress the relevance of CK to this respect once again. And as you can see, when this study was carried out, there was still quite a high number of boys undergoing biopsy. Of course, as the study went on, we realized that on a yearly basis, the number of such biopsies got lower and lower. So the average age for DMD diagnosis in Italy, again, seems to be a bit earlier than in other countries, but there still is a diagnostic delay. And as for CPK, well, the main, reason for suspicion, in which case such tests we believe should be carried out more frequently. As for other clinical signs, well, we had some abnormal gait and delayed gait and weakness. But for diagnosing the weakness, it actually took a bit longer because we usually, wait for the child to find its way through standing up. So these boys can certainly get help from the use of CPK, but we still have too few cases with an early diagnosis. Anyway, CPK is a good marker, not expensive at all, even though not too many people use it. We believe, let me stress that once again, that in a differential diagnosis, this is a test that should be carried out more frequently. If a boy is not supposed either of a cerebral palsy or other similar problems to have this kind of issue, well, then we might want to test CPK. And therapies, of course, are important, but we need to come up with an early diagnosis because we know that sometimes this, the delay the child shows may be, caught up if the diagnosis takes place, at in an early phase. So that's about it from my side. This is my last slide. So the floor goes to the following speakers. Thank you.
Per questa presentazione chiarissima e per aver
We wish to thank Professor Mercuri for this very clear presentation and for underlining this very important aspect of the diagnosis delay, especially when, of course, we are faced with a progressive disease, where, of course, the earlier you intervene, the better. I'd like to remind you that Professor Mercuri is one of the actors of the first trial of gene therapy for DMD in Italy. The trial started 1 month ago, and this is the topic of the next presentation by Beth Belluscio. Beth Belluscio is the person in charge for rare neurological diseases within Pfizer, and is going to tell us about this phase 3 clinical trial. We are very glad that Italy had the possibility of starting as second country in the world. And so I immediately give the floor to Beth. I simply wish to remind all those who are listening to start asking their questions with the Q&A session. I give you the floor, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here as part of this conference. It's always wonderful, and really appreciate the organizers of Parent Project Apps for giving us this opportunity to talk about the trial. Let's see, I am going to share and put in full screen. Okay, you should be able to see now. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully next year we'll be back in Rome and we can all see each other face to face, but this is a great opportunity. I'm Beth Belluscio, as you said, and I'm the global clinical lead for rare neurological disorders at Pfizer. Of course, things can change in the future, so we always have our disclaimer slide. But what I'm really excited to talk to you about today is our phase 3 CIFRIO study. As you mentioned, we started this study last year, and so we're really excited to have it finally rolling. And there's a few things, very important things about the study that I wanted to review today in this presentation. So the first thing to review is around the eligibility criteria. We are going to be enrolling about 100 boys in the study, and to be eligible, those boys need to be between the ages of 4 and 7, all the way up to the 8th birthday. People have asked why we chose this age group, and there are a couple of reasons, and it goes well after the video that you showed, the wonderful video about clinical trials. So for the younger cutoff, the age of 4, we did that because we're using the North Star Ambulatory Assessment to measure the efficacy of the study of the gene therapy. And the North Star Ambulatory Assessment can only be done well by boys once they're at least age 4 and up. Then we chose the upper age cutoff because the change in that North Star assessment over time, over the first year, becomes variable after the age of 8. So some boys change a lot and some boys change a little. And when there's that difference, it makes it harder to tell the difference between the placebo group and the gene therapy group. So we've chosen an age range where the boys all change about the same when they're not on therapy, and that will help us tell the difference between placebo and the gene therapy. Then another important thing about the eligibility criteria is that boys need to be taking daily steroids for at least 3 months at the time they come for screening. The steroids can be deflazacort or prednisolone or prednisone, but it has to be daily. And the reason for that is that once the study starts, the steroids will be given every day. And if boys made a change from before the study to right when the study starts in the way they take the steroids, that change can have an effect on the North Star Ambulatory Assessment. So again, that would make it difficult to tell whether that change was because of the steroids or because of gene therapy. So it's really important that boys are on their daily dose of steroids for 3 months, and then there will be no change once the study starts, and we can easily tell whether any effect on the North Star is because of the gene therapy. So then the next thing I wanted to go over was sort of in general how our study is organized. So we have 3 different periods in the study. In the screening period, there's only 2 visits. Then in the study treatment period, which lasts for 2 years, that's when we have the most visits to observe the boys. And during that 2-year period is when boys need to stay on that stable daily dose of their steroids. Then there's a long-term treatment period, which is between 3 and 4 years, depending on the group the boy ends up in. And during that time, visits are every 6 months. And also changes can be made to the steroids in consultation with the doctor. Now we know that this is a long time for the study to be going on, but we really want to make sure that patients and their families are ready to stay in the study and really commit to that study for the full time, because it's important to understand the effect of gene therapy over that longer period. It will allow us to evaluate things about when the boys are growing, and also about their heart function and their lung function, and also, of course, to get a full picture of safety. So it's very important that people can stay for the full time. So now going back to the screening period, there's only 2 visits in that period. The screening visit itself is when we evaluate for those eligibility criteria. So there'll be some blood tests, including a test of neutralizing antibodies that has to be done by the Pfizer test. Also some other tests, blood tests to make sure that it's safe to receive gene therapy, and some tests of walking function. Then if a boy is eligible for the study, he will come back for the second visit, which is the baseline visit. And 3 things will happen at that baseline visit. One is the boy gets weighed officially, and that will determine the amount of study drug that he receives. The second thing is a muscle biopsy. The requirement for muscle biopsy depends a little bit on the site and also on if the site has been fully trained in performing the muscle biopsies. So that can change a little bit over time. And it's important at the screening visit when signing the consent form that you ask the study doctor about the requirements for biopsy. Then the third thing that will happen at that baseline visit is randomization. So I wanted to talk a little bit about randomization and what that means. In our study, we have two groups because this is a placebo-controlled study. So group 1 will receive the gene therapy on the first day of this study treatment period. Group 2 will receive placebo on the first day of the study treatment period. Both the gene therapy and the placebo are given as a single IV infusion. And then the randomization that happens at baseline is sort of like a coin toss where a boy is assigned either to group 1 or group 2 in a way that the study doctor and the study team doesn't know about the assignment, the patient and the family doesn't know, and the Pfizer team doesn't know. Now we know that it's hard for patients and families to participate in a study when there's a chance of going on placebo. So we've done a couple of things to try and reduce this burden. The first is that we've actually given boys a 2 out of 3 chance to be assigned to group 1 and only 1 in 3 chance to be assigned to group 2, where placebo will be at the start of the study. The second thing we've done is to design the study in what's called delayed dosing. So what this means is that if a boy is assigned to group 2, where placebo happens at the beginning of the study, there's going to be another opportunity to get gene therapy at the beginning of the second year of the treatment period. Before getting that second IV administration, it will be determined if the boys are still safe to receive gene therapy, mostly by repeating the neutralizing antibodies to make sure they're still negative. But we hope that this design will allow all boys to have an opportunity to receive the gene therapy. So then I wanted to talk a little bit more about that treatment period and what happens during it. So after that first IV infusion, all boys will be required to stay near to the site for 2 weeks. And they'll come back and visit the site almost every day for just a checkup and vital signs and some lab tests. And this is really to make sure that everything is going smoothly, that there's no problems in that first 2 weeks. Then the boys and their family will be able to go back home and come back at 1 month for a checkup. And from 1 month to the end of the first year, there are visits about every 2 or 4 months to again do a checkup and also have tests of function. Then at the beginning of the second year, that is all repeated. So all the boys will get another IV infusion. The ones in group 1 will get an infusion of placebo, and the ones in group 2 will get their gene therapy. They'll need to stay near the site for 2 weeks, come back at 1 month, and then have visits about every 2 to 4 months until the end of the second year. And of course, all of these details would be reviewed with the study doctor at the time of reviewing the consent. So we're really excited now that the study is open and we have many sites. In fact, we have sites coming on almost every week. And this information about these slides that I prepared a few weeks ago is already out of date. So in Spain, we have the 2 sites listed here and also a 3rd site in Valencia now. Of course, we have our site in Italy, in Rome. We have 2 sites in Israel. And then we also now have a site that we've opened in the UK and in Newcastle. Because information is changing so quickly, I wanted to tell you where you can get more information. We update these sites every week. So where the trial will be open is found on clinicaltrials.gov. You can put in just Pfizer gene therapy and that'll help you find the trial. Or if you put in this number at the end that starts with NCT, that takes you directly to the phase 3 trial. You can also go to our website for this CIFRIO trial called cifrioduchennetrial.com. I'm showing here the one that's for Italy in Italian, but there are also other versions for other countries and other languages. And that has information about the sites, but also a lot of information about the study. So just in closing, I want to thank all the patient advocacy groups that have been working with us for so long to give us input into our studies and give us support, and of course, keep all of you informed about the status of the trial and other things that are important to the community. So thank you very much.
Grazie mille a Beth Beluscio, è sempre un piacere avere.
Thank you very much, Beth Beluscio. Thanks. It's always a pleasure for us to have such updating, of course. And it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Carl Morris from Biosciences. He is responsible for the supervision of the drug development processes. He is not a newcomer. So we're very happy to have him here, even if only virtually, I'm afraid. But thanks for being with us. So you'll be telling us about your development projects in the field of gene therapy. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I wish it was in Rome and drinking the coffee and the wine and having cheese, mozzarella, but hopefully next year we can do that. I'm just trying to share my screen. And hopefully you see the large screen. Yeah, so I'm Carl Morris from Solid Biosciences, and very happy to give an update on our program, Ignite DMD. So again, we have forward-looking statements that I have to make you aware of, and hopefully I'll sort of move forward. So as you're aware, Solid Biosciences is a mission-driven company and truly dedicated and driven to treat all patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So we were founded by parents, Lon and Annie Gannott, and we are working diligently to try and get potential treatments out the door and enable us to treat those patients with Duchenne. So as an overall update for our clinical program, which we called Ignite DMD, we were on clinical hold and most of last year, and luckily we were taken off hold in October, and which was great news for us and the community. The Ignite study is a phase 1/2 open label study that we are now treating patients at. We look forward to start treating patients at 2E14 vector genomes per kilogram. And we have announced that we're trying to get dosing going in this quarter. So hopefully very, very soon. While we were on hold, we weren't idle. We really sort of looked hard at what was going on. We really have greatly improved our manufacturing process to reduce the viral load, because the concern is that we're giving so much adeno-associated virus, AAV, that there is an immune response that we have observed previously, and so we thought that by reducing that through a process change, that may sort of help improve the chance of a well-tolerated dose. We also developed some clinical mitigation strategies based on our findings, and we hope that those will also improve the experience for the children. And as I mentioned, we're hoping to get into the clinic in Q1. Just as a bit of a refresher, I was hoping Beth would do this, but I'll take it. So the issue is Duchenne has patients with Duchenne don't have dystrophin, which is a very large stabilizing molecule, and you can see it up in the top right that there's it has to bind to a lot of proteins on the membrane, the dystrophin-associated protein complex or dystroglycan complex. So what we've done is we've taken a smaller identified a rational design and put together a microdystrophin that will still bind to the outside, to the dystroglycan complex, but also will sort of attach internally to act as a stabilizer. And we have uniquely included what's an nNOS binding domain, which is neuronal nitric oxide synthase, we think it may actually sort of improve some of the functionality as well, beyond that of just being stabilized. So far, what we've found, and this is taking biopsies. So this is part of the reason why we need to take biopsies from the boys, is to evaluate and see that, to make sure that we get microdystrophin expression and can sort of see it as functional. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side is a sort of a low magnification image of the muscle biopsy, where we've done a cross section, and each of those little red circles is showing microdystrophin staining on the outside of the muscle fiber. And so a couple of things from this, what you can see is it's localizing correctly to the membrane. You want the dystrophin up on the membrane. And so we're seeing that. We're also seeing that the AAV is getting where it needs to get. So there's widespread expression of the microdystrophin throughout the entirety of the muscle section, started being grouped sort of all over the place. And then on the right-hand side, just highlighting here for the 3 patients at the high dose, are all seeing pretty good levels of microdystrophin expression. The importance, and as I mentioned, microdystrophin has to bind to the membrane, and what it does it through binding to other proteins in the dystroglycan complex. And so what we need to evaluate is the microdystrophin functional? And what we're highlighting here on the left-hand side down the bottom is that the microdystrophin is there. And when you then stain for another protein, in this case, a protein called beta-sarcoglycan, which is one of those membrane proteins, you can see that we get really nice co-localization that isn't evident before in the baseline image, but in the day 90, you get really sort of nice co-localization of this protein that isn't actually directly binding, but is part of the complex at the membrane. And then uniquely for us, we also have been able to show that through NNOS staining. So we're staining to NNOS here. And again, we get that good co-localization with the microdystrophin expression. The other way to evaluate this is to look at the quantitate. And what I'm showing here are 3 sample images of what's called a Western blot. And so what we do in this case is we've qualified the assay, and what that means is that we've sort of improved the precision, the accuracy, the reproducibility of this to a place where we're confident the assay is sort of telling us what we need to know. And we're highlighting here on the right, so each of the little boxes is showing that there's clear expression of microdystrophin that we can measure, and out of the 3 patients at the high dose, we are getting about 10% normal dystrophin, which is sort of a good place to be. And what we're highlighting here is that, looking at all these different QCs, just to make sure that our which are quality controls, that all of our, we're seeing the right size, and we're also, just making sure that the blot itself is promising, is good. So I mentioned that we spent a bit of time focusing on our manufacturing process and improve it. So essentially what we've done is through just a change in that manufacturing process, we've taken the proportion of viral particles, so the adeno-associated viral capsids, and before we had 50% where they were empty. So it's sort of a delivery truck. If you imagine the AAV as a delivery truck, then half of them were empty. They didn't have anything inside them, and half of them were full. So when we dosed, we were actually giving a lot of empty capsids. We've changed the process, this 2nd generation process. And now what we're doing is we're actually now more than 90% of the delivery trucks actually have cargo inside, have the DNA that we're trying to get into the muscle cells. So we're quite excited about that. And ultimately what that means is the viral load, the amount of actual virus that we're dosing in the IV infusion is reduced by about 50% overall. So we're hopeful that we're removing the sort of the impurities, and we're hoping that this will sort of translate into a better tolerated dose. Some of the other things that we changed was we noticed that we had a complement activation, and that's been seen by us and others with the high dose gene therapy. So we decided to be thoughtful and sort of go back to the beginning and think, well, if we're getting complement activation, so that's an immune response that's observed. And so there are inhibitors available that we now use, and so we're using them prophylactically, which means at the beginning before we dose the patient, and that's to try and suppress the potential activation of the complement. And so that was sort of a significant change to what we were doing previously. The second thing is we thought that increasing the dose of steroids up to 2 mg/kg over the initial period of time would really provide a bit of a benefit as well to dampen the overall immune response. And then finally, for the first 2 patients, we are planning to have an 18 kilogram weight limitation that will then go up to 30 kilograms after we show some safe dosings. So currently we are open in 4 sites, and they are all in the United States. And we're planning that. Sorry, my daughter is walking in. We're planning that to expand beyond that once we again sort of do things thoughtfully and in a stepwise manner. Right now, we're also focusing, as I mentioned, on the smaller patients, which means that there will be the younger patients. But again, the ultimate goal is to treat all patients, be able to treat all patients with Duchenne. And so we hope to do it in a thoughtful manner, but get back into the clinic, and after a number of safe dosings, we can sort of move forward. We do have a number of as I'm highlighting here on the left, there are a number of sort of inclusion criteria, including an anti-AAV antibody test that is there to make sure that there's no seropositivity. And we've changed the steroid dosing requirement down to only 12 weeks instead of 24 weeks, similar to what Beth was talking about. So finally, we've had a very good end of the year last year. We're off hold. We're getting back into the clinic, and we've communicated that we're going to start dosing. We're also going to provide and present some of the data coming out of the last year from those 6 patients. And then we also now have a really good, we're hopeful that we can move forward. And we're doing a number of things to really sort of think about moving forward and thinking about the future. And so we can really sort of remain focused on our mission to treat patients with Duchenne. And then finally, I'd just sort of like to give a bit of a shout out to a friend and colleague, Michael Kuderman. Unfortunately, he passed away at the end of last year, and we miss him. And we just wanted to give him a bit of a shout out and to let everyone know how wonderful he was. So we miss him. And with that, I'm done, and thank you very much.
Essere stato nei tempi, aspettiamo quindi fiduciosi
Thank you also for respecting time limits. And so we'll be waiting for the results of your trial. And now we give the floor to Alex Murphy, who is the medical leader of Roche, and Teji Singh, who is the executive director of Sarepta. They'll be telling us about the gene therapy by Sarepta, SRP 9001. Roche last year bought the commercial rights for the potential marketing of this gene therapy in Europe. So we are very glad we can have both companies represented in this intervention, and we look forward to knowing what are the new things coming along, also much waited for by our families. Thank you. You have the floor.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get this to share. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, hopefully. So it's great to be here. My name is Alex Murphy, and I'm a medical director at Roche Pharmaceuticals. And I'm really pleased to be here to talk with Teji Singh, who is an executive medical director at Sarepta Therapeutics, to talk to you about our partnership and about SRP 9001. So this slide is just a disclaimer. It states this presentation was developed jointly by Roche and Sarepta and finally approved by Roche as part of the partnership between the two companies. This provides Roche exclusive commercial rights to SRP 9001 outside the United States. Both companies share development, but alongside other things, Sarepta is responsible for manufacture of SRP 9001 and the operations of clinical trials and activities in the US, while Roche looks after the regulatory approval and commercialization outside of the US. So Roche is a big organization with many companies, offices, and people throughout the world. We are many, but we are acting together as one, and we are really passionate about building a better tomorrow. Roche invests in tackling some of the world's most devastating diseases, and our spend on global research and development last year was more than any other company. And in the neuromuscular space, Roche has a history of 12 cumulative years of partnership across both spinal muscular atrophy and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Obviously, some programs have been more successful and some less so, and the Duchenne community know this perhaps better than almost any other community. But along these many years, we've been driven by the potential to transform patients' lives, which is why we work relentlessly and invest in finding treatments for people living with neuromuscular disorders. In December of 2019, Roche partnered with Sarepta Therapeutics to collaborate to improve the lives of people and families living with Duchenne. The aim was together to reach more patients with Duchenne faster than either company could on its own. So this brings me on to talk briefly about gene therapy and how it's constructed. There are three important parts. The first is the vector, which aims to deliver a package into the body and into the cell without producing a significant immune response. The second is the promoter, which helps to drive expression of the protein of interest in the cells that you want it in. In the case of Duchenne, this will be muscle cells throughout the body. The third part is the transgene, which is the main part of the package to be delivered. This encodes for the protein that we're trying to produce. In the case of SRP-9001, this is called microdystrophin. This is a shorter version of the dystrophin gene, as the full-size one wouldn't fit into the vector. And this brings me on to introduce Tejji Singh, who will talk a little bit more about the trials that have gone on so far.
Great, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to the Parent Project for inviting us to be here today. At this time, we have actually 3 ongoing studies with SRP-9001. All of them are in boys aged 4 to less than 8. 2 of the studies, studies 101 and 102, are using our clinical grade material, and 1 study, study 103, is using our commercial process material. In study 101, this was our first in human study, and this was a study in 4 boys. And in this study, we were able to show that we did get expression and the safety profile of the product was actually reasonable. This study is now into the 3rd year, so boys are now into 3rd year of follow-up. Study 102 was our first placebo-controlled trial, and we enrolled 41 boys, randomized 1-to-1 to receive either 9001 or placebo. Part 1 of this study is done, and we have the pleasure of presenting those results in the upcoming MDA meeting, the Muscular Dystrophy Association meeting in March. All boys are now in part 2, and in part 2, those boys that were on placebo are getting 9001. So those that have rolled over have now been dosed as well with 9001. And this study will continue for a total of 5 years, with part 2 being the second half of it completed at 48 weeks, and then they have a 3-year extension. Study 103 is a study that we're doing to look at the safety and expression levels with the commercial process material. This study's actually enrolled 11 boys who've all been dosed now, and we have 9 other boys that we plan to dose within the next month or so, and we'll use this data to compare the commercial process material to the clinical grade material. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Alex.
Great. Well, we'd just like to thank the patients and families who take part in clinical trials, and obviously the great people at the patient advocacy groups who invited us to speak here today. Thank you very much.
Alex e Tejji per questo vostro intervento, siete stati bravissimi anche nel scambiarvi la parola l'un l'altro e darci questo aggiornamento dei programmi di sviluppo globali. E adesso siamo molto contenti di accogliere.
Thank you very much. You've been very good also in swapping and keeping the time scheduled. So now we're going to give the floor to someone new, actually. Today, it's our pleasure to have here Dr. Olivier Danos. He is the Vice President of Regenx Bio. So he has the floor. We are definitely wishing to hear from you about the preclinical phase of this product, apparently. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me and see my screen? Okay. All right. So it's a great pleasure to be here today in front of you. I'm actually very, proud to be able to present to you our new program on gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I just want to introduce myself quickly. So I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Regenex Bio. I joined the industry about 10 years ago. And before that, I was a research scientist designing technologies for gene therapy. And a real turning point in my career was when I got together with the Duchenne patient associations in France, the AFM, and as well as the Duchenne Parents Project. And we started to work around gene therapy with Genethon about 20 years ago, at a time where things were definitely looked impossible. And it's a great, I'm so excited to see with all things going on in the clinic. Sorry, did I? Okay. I'm also showing this slide because we're a publicly traded company, how we position in gene therapy with AAV. And I'll tell you about our new candidate for gene therapy that we call RGX-202, candidate for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I'll show you a little bit of data, preclinical data that we've obtained with this candidate, and also this is still, as you will see, early in the game, and we hope to reach an IND application by the middle of this year, and this is where we'll also release more details about the activity of our for clinical trials.
Sì.
So Regenex Bio, it's headquartered in Ireland, close to Washington.
Mi scusi, dottor Danas, mi scusi, purtroppo ci dicono che c'è un problema di linea. Quindi...
There's a line problem, I'm afraid, Dr. Danas. So maybe we can try and ask the sound engineers to upload your presentation so that you can simply use your voice. But that will take some time, I'm afraid. So if you don't mind, let's move on to the Q&A session, and then we'll come back to you, okay?
What's the problem? The problem is you don't see my screen. I'm sorry. Okay.
Non si preoccupi, adesso risolviamo.
La connessione
No, the problem has to do with the internet connection, which is quite weak. That is the real problem.
Okay.
So now Q&A, the Q&A session, if the speakers are still with us.
Effettuare un esame ematico con CPK nei primi mesi di vita? Il costo è basso e permetterebbe già...
CPK to be tested already in the very early months of life, wouldn't that be okay? And is it being done?
Screening, at least in males, a CPK test.
Well,
that is something we are trying to evaluate. We have been discussing about it at length, but there is some resistance because generally screenings are adopted only if there is a treatment available, a confirmed treatment, say in spinal atrophy, Well, there we have a neonatal screening because there is an accepted treatment, an accepted therapy, and that well, solves the initial signs of the disease that are present in the first months of life. When there is no confirmed therapy, it is difficult. This is a discussion that has been going on for many years, also with Parent Project. I mean, there is this proposal of the screening, but we are not within the criteria for neonatal screening or a screening in the first months of life. It is assessed, but until we don't have a therapy that is considered, I wouldn't say as a cure, but let's say a therapy that can really make a big change if it is administered in the first weeks of life, it is very difficult to have this screening accepted. Thank you, Professor Mercuri. Now you can use also your video so we can well, the problem with the camera is that I would have to switch everything off and then on again, so that would take 15 minutes. We have a question by Chiara. Good evening. We were lucky in this grace because we had a diagnosis when our child was 7. They speak about a protocol for any drug because, I mean, there is a very good reason for that. But as for night splinters, I mean, my child at 16 months has a calf that is already hardened. But since we have had such an early diagnosis, why still physical therapists are not being listened to? I mean, what Chiara means is why don't we have physical therapy immediately also on very small children? Professor Mercuri, once again, you are the one who is supposed to answer the question. Well, first of all, you must make a distinction between psychomotricity and physical therapy. In very small children, you don't really need to carry out physical therapy because there are no retraction, there are no clear motor signs responding to physical therapy. What we see in very small children is rather that we may have a delay in different acquisitions, but these acquisitions then tend to come, let's say, when they at the age where they should be able to climb stairs with the 2 feet. Well, they are not yet able to do that, but they will become able to do that. But that has to do with movement patterns that can be encouraged or accelerated, so to speak, with psychomotor training. So an early diagnosis, as I was trying to say in my last slides, that would help to get a more tailored intervention. We are not speaking of physical therapy, but rather of psychomotor intervention. Well, they are telling us that we can resume with the last presentation. Well, we are doing the following. We'll be showing, well, you just get the audio, just comment the slides without having to share your presentation. But you must tell us when we must change the slide, because otherwise we wouldn't know. So you must say something like next slide when you want the slide to be changed. Okay, we try again.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so the next slide, please. And the next slide. Okay, so I was presenting Regenex Bio, and where we're coming from is that we are an AAV technology company. We have a proprietary platform of over 100 different AAV vectors, and a lot of them have been partnered with you know, other industries that develop their own products. We have also our own pipeline that I will show you. One of these products, as you may know, has been approved for spinal muscular atrophy, and this is under the name of Zolgensma, commercialized by Novartis today. So we have in-house research and development, manufacturing capabilities, and you know, we have a number of great experts working at the company developing drugs with AAV. Next slide. Shows you our pipeline. So the DMD is the latest addition to this pipeline, but this pipeline has a lot of activity in ophthalmology with age-related macular degeneration. This is a program that's getting into pivotal phase. We also have activities in neurodegenerative disease with the Hunter syndrome, Hurler syndrome, and Batten disease. Next slide. So this slide just, I think we can skip this slide for the sake of time. Next slide. This is just about DMD itself, and you know about that. Next slide, please. Next. Okay. So, okay, we can do this one. Okay, all right. So this is to present to you our candidate. This is something that where we use AAV8 as a capsid, serotype 8. We have a construct which is a microdystrophin. We have our own blend of domains that we keep in the microdystrophin, hinges and rod regions. And the notable addition that we have here is the C-terminal part, the end part of the dystrophin that we put back into the microdystrophin. This had been excluded in the past because obviously you can show that it's not needed for the basic function of microdystrophin of recovering some of the muscle force and resistance to stress. But it turns out to be very useful, we believe, for additional activities of dystrophin, which are linked to its role as a general organizer at the cell membrane. This microdystrophin is under the control of a tissue-specific promoter, a muscle-specific promoter that's called SPC512. Next slide. So this is again to show you the structure of our microdystrophin, RGX-202, and this is to insist on the fact that we have the C-terminal part, which is the green box at the right end of the drawing depicting the microdystrophin here. And this C-terminal is important in bringing back at the cell membrane proteins like dystrobrevin, syntrophins, and syntrophins in turn also binds NO synthase, and we've seen from the solid bioscience presentation that this also is believed to be an important component of a therapeutic microdystrophin. Next slide. So this slide shows you that in an MDX mouse that's treated with our vector, with our microdystrophin, we do express microdystrophin, obviously, in the muscle very efficiently at the level of a mouse. As you know, we can really have a 100% recovery of microdystrophin in multiple muscles, in most muscles. But also it shows, and I'm not sure it can be seen very efficiently here, but this slide shows you that we also recover localization at the sarcolemma of proteins like syntrophins, dystrobrevin, and nNOS, which are the protein that we want to make sure we also express at the muscle surface with our microdystrophin. Next slide. So those are some of the evidence of recovery of muscle strength in the animals that are treated with our microdystrophin. On the left panel, you see a result of the grip strength test, where we measure the strength of an animal that holds a little handbar. And as you see, there's a marked decrease of force when we measure that on MDX mice, which are the DMD model, compared to the gray wild-type mice. And most of the force is recovered after treatment with the microdystrophin here. And if we isolate muscles and measure force in vitro on the right panel, we also recover up to 80% of the force here after treatment. So this, definitely matched the standard for a good functioning microdystrophin. I'm not showing you today the whole complement of our preclinical data, and this is something that we'll definitely show when we're around the IND time. But we've been very surprised by the high activity that we can get of recovery definitely in the mouse model. And that really encouraged us to bring this to patients as soon as we can. Next slide. So next slide is just to recap that again, we have an AAV vector. The plan is to administer it IV, and the vector AAV is actually a very good vector that's been validated in clinical trials to target efficiently the muscle. And what we're going to look for, obviously, is expression of microdystrophin, and as a consequence, assembly of the proper complex of proteins at the cell membrane, and recovering the connection between cytoskeleton and the extracellular matrix and the cell membrane. Next slide. So this is where we are today. We've done the two first steps of a lot of optimization of our construct, identification of a candidate. We're finalizing now our preclinical studies and putting all this together in an IND application that we hope to be able to submit by mid-year. And if everything goes well, patient treatment could start later this year, at the end of the year. Of course, community engagement is something that's very important for us. And again, this is a great opportunity today to open up and introduce this project to you. Next slide. I will just skip that because this is what I said, that I presented you something which is still very early. We're definitely not first in the game, but gaining a lot from what others have already observed and done in the clinic, advanced in the clinic. And I think by mid-year we'll be in a position where we can give you important updates on essentially also on the activity of our construct and the structure of the design of our clinical trial. Next slide, which I think is the last one. So don't hesitate to be in touch with us either on our website or by directly contacting us by email. Thank you very much.
Grazie Olivier, siamo felici di essere riusciti a recuperare il problema.
Thank you. We are very glad we have been able to hear you.
Yeah.
And so the connection in the end went right. Now we have a question. It is a drug on casimersen on the skipping of exon 45. I would invite whoever asked this question to go to tomorrow morning session, speaking about strategies. So I'd like to go to the second question to Pfizer. Why having a biopsy rather than NMR? Why a biopsy and not NMR?
Right. I think the most important thing about the biopsy is that it allows us to really see the new gene that's being put in as part of gene therapy. So the new mini dystrophin. When you look at MRI, it doesn't allow you to see those sorts of details about the genes that are being put in. So the biopsy allows us to see that aspect of gene therapy. It also allows us to see other details about the muscle in terms of individual muscles, how healthy they are, if there's some sort of inflammation going on. So it's a different amount of information that's given by the biopsy. But for gene therapy in particular, it's very important to see how the therapy is working.
Grazie mille, Beth. La prossima domanda.
Thank you, Bert. There is another question, again on Pfizer study. Claudia is asking, when will the enrollment finish for gene therapy in Italy? When will the enrollment be completed? Well, we have just started. So the enrollment is competitive all over the world. So we have 99 patients to enroll, and we have just enrolled 5 or 6, so we have plenty of time. We'll keep enrolling until at the global level we reach the appropriate number. At present, we have been able to give an answer to all screening requests. We have already screened 12 or 13 boys, maybe even 14 if we include next week. And Parent Project at present knows very well how many families are involved. We are getting other requests from clinicians. So unless Pfizer sets a stop, as was the case for other studies, will go on. Beginning of next month, we'll start with another center, so we'll be able to double the possibility of doing this. Thank you.
Un'altra domanda viene da
There's another question now from Anne. She would like to know, for 26-year-old adults, what can be done? I think the question, of course, should be viewed within the framework of gene therapy. So maybe any of you might want to answer.
I'll say something. I think we obviously want to get and treat all the patients. You know, the video highlighted that there are steps that are required during drug development, and I think that you know, we are sort of taking a measured approach right now, and we have to be to ensure that we have tolerated doses. But ultimately, the goal would be to get into all patients, and hopefully that can happen as soon as possible.
Ok, non so se qualcun altro anche vuole aggiungere rispetto a questa domanda.
Would anybody else like to take the floor to answer this question? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. So, a question from Anna, which is the dose for the IND used by Pfizer?
Right, so for our phase 3 studies, for all of those studies, we're using a dose of 2e to the 14, which is the same as the high dose that we used in our phase 1 study.
Abbiamo adesso una domanda molto...
And now another question. It's actually a very long question by Costantino for all 3 companies. So Sarepta, Pfizer, and Solid. So the question is the following. Yesterday, Professor Byrne said that AAV therapies do not reach out to myoblasts, the muscle progenitors. Therefore, once having done without the effect of AAV, then it is only uncorrected cells that come into play, therefore sick cells, so to speak. And I understand companies have not coped with this issue, whereas it might somehow do with the duration, with the length of the trial, possibly in a negative way. So what about it? And how long would it take to replace the uncorrected cells once the virus is activated by antibodies? And apart from immunosuppression, is there any other strategy that companies have in mind to think of a new injection? Well, actually, the question goes on, but it may really take too long. So you have the floor, anybody.
Chi vuole cominciare? Beth, ok.
Yeah,
Beth?
so I think one thing to understand about the way all of these gene therapies work is that the virus shell, so the AAV shell, is just sort of a box that delivers the gene to the cells. So the virus with the gene inside is given in the IV, goes into the blood, and then this shell helps to deliver the gene inside the muscle cells. Then the antibodies come and take the virus pieces away, the virus shells away, but the gene stays inside the cells. So even after all the immune system and the antibody does its work, that doesn't mean that the therapy is no longer working because the gene is still inside. I don't think anybody right now knows how long the gene will stay in the cells. We'll have to see. It's part of what we do in our clinical studies. But we think it will happen for many years, hopefully. And so the issue of the progenitor cells won't be really an issue while that gene is staying in the muscle cells. Maybe many years down the line, that will be part of what we need to understand. But for the first few years, that's not really a problem.
Bene. Sentiamo gli altri se hanno voglia di aggiungere.
Would anybody else like to take the floor and add something to this answer?
Yeah,
Sure.
if I may.
Absolutely. I agree with Beth. I think Beth had a great explanation. A couple of things. Dr. Burns, who we work with a lot, does have what he's asking potentially also about is redosing. But a few things I'd like to point out is that with muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells, they're actually long-lived. So even though you'll get new cells with fusion, there'll still be the existing nuclei that'll have the gene therapy. And in non-clinical models, not just ours, but other groups as well, other academic groups, we actually have long-term durability data in like the golden retriever model out to the lifespan of the animal. And I think Dr. Mercuri can talk more about that. There's also other targets. So some of the transgene will get to other targets outside of skeletal muscle, like cardiac muscle, which is permanent. Those cells don't divide or actually grow, so there may be some benefit there. And then for gene therapy as a field, and I'll pick on hemophilia because the liver turns over very quickly, there's a lot of work already on how to potentially at some point, if needed, how to redose patients, whether that's apheresis plus immunosuppressants or a column. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there'll be a lot of work driven by other gene therapies where you have to redose of how to potentially overcome that issue with pre-existing immunogenicity after an exposure. But I defer to others to weigh in and add more to this.
Anche Olivier voleva.
Thank you very much. Actually, maybe Olivier would like to add something to this.
I just want to add quickly a comment that I wouldn't be that pessimistic, and there is evidence that the progenitor cells in the muscle are targeted with AAV and receive the gene. So potentially we can have modified progenitor cells that later will reconstitute the muscle with the transgene, right? So that's I think we shouldn't neglect this notion, and it's something that's I think hope for the future.
Per concludere la domanda.
Andrei con la seconda parte.
Let's move on to the second part of the same question, again by Costantino. That is, what about safety parameters, considering that boys grow up and that the dosing goes with their weight, but also considering that sometimes AAV in an exaggerated amount may lead to rejection inside the liver. They may even be lethal. So any ideas about what to do in the future? It's again for all of you.
I guess I'll sort of make a comment. I think we're all sort of trying to do this diligently and carefully, and I think all of the companies here are really sort of monitoring and the patients very closely and working directly with the physicians to sort of ensure that the patients are being managed very, very well. It's early stages in this space, and so we just have to be thoughtful about what we're doing. We have taken an approach where we're looking at smaller patients right now, and then we'll sort of expand once we have a better understanding of the responses. Pfizer, is in 4 to 7 years of age, as is the Roche Sarepta program right now. So I think they're sort of focusing on smaller patients. So I think we're building a body of evidence that will become, sort of suitable to help us expand into those broader populations and learn about any of the longer term potential toxicities, which haven't been observed in Duchenne, as far as I'm aware.
Grazie mille, Carla.
Well, thank you very much. Apparently, we have run out of time, or almost so, as a matter of fact. Since we keep having questions, on the other hand, so we'll just collect them all, and don't worry, you will all get your answers. But maybe we'll close with one question. What about the average investment, the average economic investment for every single trial? Well, of course, trials are known to be expensive, but you answer, please.
Un ordine di grandezza.
Well, approximately, of course.
It's expensive, and we have to raise money. We did a deal with Ultragenics and to sort of get another player in the space and sort of enable more shots on goal, so to speak, for Duchenne. They have a program coming, but they sort of gave us some money to help us move forward. And we have to fundraise. We raised 150 million to sort of keep going. It's very, very expensive.
Grazie mille, Carla.
If I can comment.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Questo no. No, questo no. Chi voleva commentare?
Was there anybody wishing to say something about this?
Yes, I wanted to say about the cost that a Duchenne gene therapy program is particularly expensive because this is a program with large doses of vector to be manufactured, right? So that's something to take in consideration. And at REGENXBIO, we definitely plan for this cost, and this is something that we have the capabilities and capital for that. But this is really something that's in the high ranges of gene therapy development costs.
Grazie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And now we have two questions for Professor Mercuri. What is the most updated scientific explanation about those DMD forms that are diagnosed as intermediate, so between DMD and BMD? And what about those forms where there's a mutation linked to a DMD phenotype, whereas the phenotype rather recalls BMD? Any epigenetic studies here? Thank you. Thank you. Well, actually, such intermediate phenotypes are more and more difficult to be defined because with the steroid treatments, we knew that 12 years of age was a sort of a benchmark, but that made things simple. But now, thanks to, of course, cortisone, standards of care, and other therapies, we know that sometimes there are ambulatory boys above 10 years, 12 years of age. So it seems like on average, all DMD boys change their phenotype into an intermediate one, which may go hand in hand with the kind of mutation that is involved. But the point is that there are no fixed criteria there. But again, let me stress that such intermediate phenotypes, thanks to the new standards of care, have become more frequent. On the other hand, sometimes the phenotypes are more severe. Sometimes even within the same family, we get more variable phenotypes, either milder or more severe. Well, in this respect, we have some studies that are quite well known that are precisely trying to find even more phenotypes. And again, other studies have shown that some specific phenotypes, such as the exon 44 skipping, well, they may be milder and lead to better situations. Anyway, in Italy, Professor Pecoraro is dealing with this also thanks to the association support. But there are other studies we're carrying out with Professor Perlini. Well, actually, there are also other associated genes, not modifying genes, but they may actually interfere with the degree of severity of the phenotype. Some clinical pictures may be particularly multifaceted and complicated that may take us away from a DMD diagnosis, but there may be the involvement of other neighboring genes or other genes, not modifying genes, but more genes that may be involved, thus contributing to the severity of the general picture. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Please do attend tomorrow morning session when these aspects will be dealt with. I'm afraid we'll have to stop answering your questions, but again, don't worry, because our speakers will be so kind as to provide their answers via email. So now the floor goes to the next session, which is going to be a psychosocial session. The title is Psychological Aspects in Communicating the Diagnosis. The floor goes to families. Emanuela Giulitti will be chairing that session. She's one of our psychologists. She works in our counseling center. She's been with us for several years, actually since 2009. So she's been with us for the last 12 years. She is a highly professional woman, and thanks to this, she can really be on the side of the families as of the very early stages of their boys' disease. And as Christina said about Marika, I would like to say the same for Emanuela. She's a great support for families and also for us, staff members. So let me close by warmly thanking our speakers. So now the floor goes to Emanuela.
Good evening. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that this session has been made possible thanks to our teamwork of the National Listening Center and close cooperation with my colleague Nicole Coluzzi, who has managed all the aspects. She is present here, but unfortunately she has a voice problem. Pain, inadequacy, disappointment, these are the emotions that may be felt by a parent or a family receiving a diagnosis of DMD or BMD. as from the moment of diagnosis, all the stages of the disease, the life of the patients, of the families, can prove to be extremely complicated. I have that is something that they all have lived, the information about the diagnosis. All the people involved, the parent, the sibling, the child. So today we'll have a different session, psychological aspect in the communication of the diagnosis. So we want to give an expression to all the stakeholders, giving all of you useful strategies to face this moment. So there will be a number of interviews with the people who are involved in the communication. The protagonists are the parents, so we'll be having them as witnesses. Miriam, and then Francesco, a sibling, and Roberta, who is the sister of Luca, clinicians. We'll have an interview with Dr. D'Amico, who is a neuropediatrician at the Bambino Gesù Hospital for neuromuscular and neurodegenerative diseases operating unit. When the doctor informs about the diagnosis, it's like as if a wave invested you. So fear, pain, uncertainties, and anger. There are very strong emotions and negative thoughts that parents who receive a diagnosis of rare disease can have. Roberta, the moment of diagnosis is something unforgettable. It is really a shift from uncertainty to the certainty, awareness that something is changing. Yes, it's true. We can't hear the speaker very well. We can't hear her very well. Maybe it's your microphone. So there is a change in pre-existing reality, and so people need a new stability. We have the need of sort of normalizing what has happened to you so as to face the change and the tensions deriving from such a piece of news. In this process, a fundamental role is played by communication and dialogue, the sharing of emotions among members of the family, and that is truly essential. All that you feel, and also involving the child in this process of accepting the pathology. I mean, that is absolutely essential. The patient must be informed of what is going on, of course, in a simple and clear way. So measuring the information provided, gauging the information provided on the basis of age and development of the child. With our small patient, you can use different strategies, game, drawings, reading of comics. The objective is giving the children with the necessary tools to elaborate what has happened, to have a better awareness of their difficulties and resources. This will enable them not to fear too much, not to feel limited, and to follow with a better awareness this the pathway of the pathology of the disease itself. This will enable the child and the family to develop strategies useful to face the diagnosis and the further steps. The closeness of one's own family, cultivating one's passions, devoting oneself to inclusive and alternative activities will enable the patient not to feel limited and to achieve his goal. because his cognitive abilities and the closeness to his sister and the parents have become his trump card. Facing a diagnosis is not simple. It is not simple for the physician either, because he must provide this information. I mean, that as well is something extremely cumbersome. And Dr. D'Amico will tell us that the way in which to communicate a diagnosis is not something they teach you at university, and even a clinician may feel uneasy. Communication should be given to both parents in a private place with no interferences, devoting as much time as possible to the couple, and also leaving a lot of time for questions. The physician will show his or her interest in as far as he or she will devote time and attention to parents, because parents are so tense that they may not be able to, to understand all the information provided. And so maybe the physician might suggest further interviews, possibly with the participation of an enlarged families. The communication must be precise and exhaustive. You must provide information about the pathology, but also on possible treatments. It is essential to have other support people, such as a psychologist, as we read in the literature, providing information, parents association or patients associations is useful to build relationships with people who have had similar experiences, who have gone through similar experiences, and also to obtain information and possible solutions to problems. As Miriam suggested, the support of the Parent Project Association was essential. The Duchenne Listening Center can support families in developing a number of resources, both personal and social ones, to face the moment, and also accompanying these families in the process of acceptance and sort of normalization of the pathology. But now we give the floor to families with a video that now you are going to see on. I'm Miriam, and I am the mother of Valentino. Valentino, unfortunately, suffers from DMD. He is 3 years of age. I'm Francesco. I am 12. And I've just finished the 5th year of primary school. And now I've started my first year of mid-school. Well, I'm very glad I can go to school. COVID, unfortunately, has made it impossible for many kids to go to school, whereas I'm still going to school. I'm very glad of that. Before COVID, I had lots of activities. I am Roberta. I am the sister of Luca, Silvia, and Claudio. Luca is a DMD patient. I have a degree in molecular biology, and certainly this choice has been determined also by my brother's disease. At present, I'm working here in Rome. I'm working at home. I mean, and then I hope I can come back to Rome, possibly after experience. I am a neuropediatrician. And I work on the diagnosis of these diseases. I work at the Bambino Gesù Hospital, operational unit for neuromuscular neurodegenerative diseases, diagnosis, management of the patients. You remember when when you were given the diagnosis? Do you remember that moment? Well, when I was informed about the diagnosis, well, I remember that extremely well. It was on the 27th of September of 2018, and Valentino was only 7 months old. We went to this hospital, and there they told us the diagnosis of DMD. And well, I knew that there was something wrong with Valentino, because at 40 days of life, he was submitted to an operation because I had stenosis of the pylorus, and the results of the analysis had made us discover that the CPK was very high. And so we started a number of tests and up to muscle biopsy. And that's it. And then they told us about this diagnosis. Well, of course, it was a disaster. I just felt the world was collapsing on top of me. And then I really had a number of images of Valentino where he wouldn't be able to do anything. He would no longer be able to run or play with other boys, play football or ride a bike. I mean, all terrible things. And the worst one was that he would have to spend his whole life on a wheelchair. That was it. I mean, that was the worst moment. And then they told us as well that there was this parent project association, and we immediately became members of the association. And we have truly discovered a large family where still they support us. They are always there. And thanks to them, well, they explained us the situation better, what might happen or not. And so we got their support.
Ricordi la prima volta che hai parlato con i tuoi genitori? Francesco, do you remember the first time you talked about your muscle problems to your parents? When I talked about this to mom and dad, well, I don't really remember when that happened because they often tell me what it is about, but I do know. I know only too well what I can and what I can't do. I don't need any explanations, but I'm getting used to it. You talked about explanations. What were your parents' explanations? They told me that the problem sometime came from the mom. But in my personal case, no, it just came out on its own, as if my body had made that decision on its own. So it's nobody's fault. And I also know that it's a neurological problem too. So sometimes it happens that my muscles ache, and when when I've got back pain, that is really difficult to deal with that. What was your parents' reaction when they heard about your brother's disease? Well, I don't remember exactly the time when I was personally told about that. What I do remember, though, was the general atmosphere that was typical of our family at that time. Certainly not a very happy atmosphere. My parents looked quite worried, and in the days before the diagnosis, when there was just a suspicion of muscular dystrophy without the final confirmation, that was particularly the case. Of course, I remember they were sorry, and of course, the situation was extremely sorrowful for them all and for the family. Do you remember the first time you told somebody about neuromuscular disease diagnosis? I don't, actually. I don't remember the very first time. But I can say that during the first years of my clinical activity as a pediatrician, I remember I felt inadequate. You know, in the first years, whenever I had a diagnosis to tell the patients about, I felt inadequate. I felt like even the setting where the diagnosis was communicated was inadequate. Everything was extremely cold. You know, the setting was very cold. And I felt like even the mode of communication was totally inadequate. I could tell I lacked the proper tools for that, proper communication tools. And one more thing, again, I don't remember my first diagnosis, but for sure, every single neuromuscular disease diagnosis has been, that I have communicated, has been accompanied by me vomiting. You know, every time I keep, you know, I have that in mind, that memory comes back to my mind, I immediately feel the same feeling. You know, maybe at the beginning I am focused on the technicalities, on the actual disease, but then when I get to know the family and I must tell them about their son's diagnosis, well, then it's a problem for me too. So what did you think at that time and then in the weeks and months that followed a diagnosis? Now, at that very moment, I, of course, only had negative thoughts. I could see my son who would not be able to do such a number of things because of that diagnosis. At a later stage, I felt better. I felt better because we have been told about what may have happened. And I mean, it was better, generally speaking, because we had got definitely well aware of what we were supposed to be faced up to. We felt like that was supposed to be Valentino's normal life. Francesco, what did you think of your mom's and dad's explanation the first time they gave this explanation? Well, I was not afraid. Actually, I wanted to know more about it. I was very young. But already when I was 2 years old, Mom started telling me about it, but I can't remember it all now because I was really too young. What about the emotions that you felt? Can you remember any of them? Can I remember any of them? No, I can't really. Because I was only 2 years old, you know, I was far too young. I can't really remember. But now they keep talking to me about this, and you know, I'm happy I'm having these problems. So there have been emotional changes within your family, right? Well, yes, definitely so. well, family balances have changed, if you wish. And, you know, we all went through a dark hour. We felt that was what our life looked like at that time, but we seem to, albeit partially, we seem to have overcome that. Of course, at the beginning, we were all very sorry, very worried, but then we reacted. Also, considering Luca was also the youngest member in the family, which made it worse on the one hand, but better because he certainly deserved our attention. Well, this is, of course, what I personally felt. I felt like he was entitled to having a life as better as possible. What do you, I mean, how do you feel when you have to communicate a diagnosis? Well, in these past few years, I have been trying to better organize the communication because, you know, there's not just, you know, one way to do it, but there must be a method. You know, everybody may have theirs own, but I have mine. So I try to do that at a time of my working day when I know that nobody will come asking for me somewhere. I must also get all the documents ready because when the diagnosis is communicated, all the documents pertaining to the boy are handed out to the family. So I really try to have everything ready upstream for the moment to be as smooth as possible. Then, of course, every time it's different, you know. But the moment must be prepared. Any changes in your family life after the communication of the diagnosis or in the relationship with your son or with your husband? Well, we have certainly had changes in our couple relationship. You know, this is already the case when a boy is born, but then when you get the diagnosis of your boy, it's even worse, of course. But then, you know, reactions change, reactions vary. So we have all had different reactions. There was certainly some tension between us, but with time, tension has dampened in a way. We've tried to help each other, if you wish, for example, by sharing different ways to help. One of us would accompany our boy, would take our boy to clinical examinations. The other one may do something else. But one thing is sure, talking is of paramount importance. And let me take this chance to thank Parent Project for helping me through this. There are changes for sure, and this may, of course, lead to a closer relationship or the other way around, which was the case at the beginning for our couple, but then it changed. Well, Valentino has no siblings, so I can't answer about that. As for the rest of the family, you know, relatives, grandparents, and so on, well, they try to be with Valentino the way they would be with any other boy, you know, playing and so on and so forth. Now, there was a time when you were told about the treatments that you were supposed to undergo, say, cortisone therapy or physical therapy. So what about that time? Well, it wasn't too difficult. Actually, now I have got used to it. And actually, when I see that I'm taking no drugs, I ask my parents, how come I'm not taking this drug? And that sometimes my dad or my mom say, yes, you're right, I forgot. So sometimes they remember because I remind them. But you know, making mistakes is quite normal. But again, no problem for me. I have got used to it. You know, I can taste so many things in my mouth. Okay, not bad. What about any changes in for example, the relationships with your parents or between your parents and your brother? Well, regarding the first part of your question, what can I say? I don't really know. I mean, I was quite young at that time, so I didn't really notice. I didn't notice whether their relationship was undergoing any special changes, but they have certainly changed their approach to my brother. They have started, like the rest of us, to be more, you know, to give more attention to my brother, to be kinder towards him. Otherwise, I have tried to focus my own relationship with him. Having said that, within the family, the whole thing has, I believe, strengthened the relationship with my sisters because we've, you know, shared our feelings more easily, and sharing became quite normal at that time, especially with Sylvia, who's my own age. So there was a lot that we did share. I mean, we shared the pain, the sorrow, the worries.
Qual è la cosa più difficile per un
What is the
clinico?
most difficult thing for a clinician who has to communicate the diagnosis of a rare disease? Well, on one side, maintaining a distance so that we can tell the family what the pathology is about and what is going to happen to them. And unfortunately, we must set a sort of distance, but we must also be empathic. We must be sympathetic. There must be an appropriate balance of the two things. So having on one side the role of the clinician, of the doctor, so also keeping trying to control the emotional side, because of course it is a very important, a very difficult moment for us as well from the emotional viewpoint. And it is rather tragic to inform people about such a diagnosis. So having this empathy with the family, try to be sympathetic, and this interview can go on for a long time, even 1 hour, and we must make them understand that we'll be close to them in this pathway. This is what I try to do, to be a reference point for the family. Have you also adopted other strategies in that at that time? No, I don't think there are other strategies because for the couple, the most important thing is talking about it because the couple, the two members of the couple are facing the same thing, so they are on the same wavelength. they must face all that is happening, speaking and speaking. This is my advice. Have you activated strategies to face these moments? Well, yes, I did. I tried rather than using physical strength, I tried to use my brain to do some things. Instead of using a lot of force to do something, it is simpler to invent something to overcome the problem. What about you? Have you changed? Have you devised strategies to face the moment? I've changed. Yes, I realize it now, I'd say, when the DMD was diagnosed to Luca, because I realize, because I have a different sensitivity for some situations, and I try to play down other problems that maybe are so important for other people that come to tell me about other problems that for me are quite irrelevant. When I was a little girl, the only thing I did, I don't know, something maybe was something very stupid, my prayers before going to sleep. That was my strategy. And then the other strategy was being really very close to my brother so that he could have an easy life as much as possible. So without giving too much importance to the disease and enjoying the moments we spent together. And so a strong attachment with him, also in this respect, to try and spend as much time as possible with him. What helps you in facing that moment, your clinical practice? Well, certainly experience. I've been doing this job for the last 15 years, so I have to communicate diagnosis, and each diagnosis I communicated has taught me something. So it is a matter of experience. Unfortunately, as long as I was being trained as a physician, there wasn't a subject where they taught us how to communicate diagnosis. So we start practicing, and that's it. So the thing that helps me most, it's my experience. I've learned from the mistakes I made. Families who sometimes have complained about wrong ways of communicating the diagnosis. And so I have modified my approach. And also another thing that helps is the knowledge of the pathology, because when we inform about the diagnosis, we must have a good knowledge of the disease we are telling them about. So speaking about the story of the disease, if there are therapeutical prospects, all these aspects must be treated in a stepwise way, but a good knowledge of the disease is very important. Because you can mention some of the things that are more difficult to accept, or things that must be underlined more. Valentino, started to have some changes, or he has already started some treatments. How did you explain all that to him? How did you share such difficulties with him? Well, yes, Valentino started very early. He had this tablet for the heart. We have sort of worked upstream since we knew the diagnosis. Well, his changes, well, this tablet that he must take every day. Then he started physical therapy, speech therapy. Now we have this night splinters. So a number of changes in his everyday life. We have always tried to tell these things through playing. For example, for night splinters, I mean, the joke was that they give him superpowers like superheroes, sort of he reloads himself with these splinters. So we try to transform everything into a game, and he's a very good boy. He's a very good boy. For the time being, he has accepted everything. He's a very good boy, very good boy. But as for us, you know, some changes are more difficult to accept for us. Well, no, our approach is, oh God, now it's the time to do this and that, but we still know it is prevention. So then we do it, and that's it. And we try to do it in the best possible way. Well, your disease has limited you in some ways. Well, no, not really. But there are some things I can't possibly do. For many reasons. Well, I have no strength in my muscles. My body hasn't got enough strength. I cannot make many movements. So now I know that in the movements I'm very careful in what I do, but normally I feel fine. Have you observed some changes outside your family, at school, in the social environment? Well, the changes I've noticed at the social level, apart from my attention towards people who have some difficulties, well, the answer is no, not really. When we discovered the disease, until Luca somehow could walk, was ambulant, I wouldn't tell my friends or my schoolmates. I wouldn't tell them that my brother had this problem. But then, with time, possibly I grew up myself, and so I've decided to face the situation in a different way. As for Luca's social interactions, well, people at large, especially at school, because he spent a lot of time at school with other kids, hyperprotection by the teacher, also concern by other kids, but also closeness of these schoolmates. So then you realize that all in all, there is also some good in people. Yes, there are many people who behave badly, or could be, or can be, or maybe unpleasant. There are also lots of people who are very willing to be helpful, which is very encouraging. Now, what is your everyday life now? What are the changes you have had now after a few years? Well, in our everyday life today, well, our everyday life, of course, has changed, and we face it in a different way, but we are better aware, better aware. We do all we can so that Valentino can live a life that is as normal as possible. So we try to be ourselves as normal as possible. So that's it. We'll do our best. We are doing our best to give him a life that is as normal as possible. Francesco, now that you are a bit older, what is your opinion about your disease? Well, I believe that this disease has some severe effects on some people, and in some cases it doesn't. So what I think is that we can give it a try. Well, couldn't be any worse, couldn't be any better. So if I am determined and if I overcome my problems, well, maybe I can do everything. What can you tell us? What is your everyday life like? Well, my everyday life is okay, as it was before. I mean, let's say that this pain I have in my back is not so much due to the pathology, but also to a number of falls I've had. So this back pain is probably due to the many falls I've had. Is not so much linked to the disease, because this is something that I've got used to. Of course, I don't know how many things might have changed to the best or to the worse. Maybe I had no disease, but I don't know, or might have had different parents or be a bad boy, and so also my upbringing would have changed.
Malattie neuromuscolari, come è cambiata? Since the time you have been dealing with neuromuscular diseases, how has the diagnosis communication changed? As I have already said, at least based to my personal experience, there have been dramatic changes. As I said at the beginning, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to communicate to parents. Sometimes I had to have a psychologist next to me for the moment of the diagnosis communication. And sometimes even for certain time further to that. This is now still the case, by the way. And then 15 years ago, there were no perspectives in terms of treatment, whereas now we have so many therapies that we can communicate the diagnosis as we tell the family about the different pathways that their boy is going to undergo. So the family are not simply, passively flooded with the news of their son's diagnosis, but there are many more data that are provided in terms of the treatment or treatments that can actually modify the boy's trend. How do you see your future and your son's future, also from your couple's perspective? Well, when I think of Valentino's future, I think of something very much within the range, within the normal range. I mean, I'll do my best for him to be just one boy like other boys. As for us, well, I believe we are going to, I presume we are going to do our best to make his life as normal as possible. So I believe we're going to have a joyful future, and Valentino will be able to do all, and we are doing our best for enabling him to do so. So he will have his, his experiences. Francesco, how do you see your future? Well, I believe my future is going to be like my daily living right now. I believe, there are obstacles to be overcome to go on with one's life. I see life as something where problems must be overcome. You should never give up, as it is sometimes the case for some. So I must try and overcome all obstacles in my life. So far, I have managed to do so. I would like to do many things before I die. I really want to climb up my mountain before the avalanche comes and gets me. What do you see your brothers, how do you see your brother's future and your own future? I don't see my own future in any way, really. Because, for example, right now I'm not in Rome, but I may come back in the future. So I can't really think of me in the too much far ahead. I don't really know. And the same goes for my brother's future. But we'll be together. That is one thing I know. We'll be together. We'll all be together within our family. Now that I'm not living in Rome, I feel like I want to go back home as soon as possible. Can you describe Valentino to us? What is he look like? Valentino is a joyful, a merry boy. He's always smiling. He's full of life. He may even be naughty if you wish sometimes. Would you like what? Would you like to become someone in particular? What about your dreams? Well, I have many of them, but sometimes they are also few, because I'd like to, of course, I know I've got my imagination that takes me far ahead, but I very much live in the present time. Anyway, I would love to drive a car. This is a dream I have. It would be so nice to drive a car and feel the adrenaline come get grip of your brain. And I would also like to improve my educational background so as to be able to help other people.
È lui che ci dà la forza di andare avanti.
He drives us forward, you know. There are dark times, but then you just look at him and you say to yourself, no, I'm sure we can make it.
Come poteri di Superman, cioè che
Well,
poteri di Superman è come se fossi
suppose I am Superman. I may be a Superman because after all, I am quite special, you know.
Vorrei anche mandare un messaggio, insomma, a
I would
tutta
also like to spread a message to the DMD community.
di andare sempre avanti con
Just keep going.
la ricerca,
Keep going with the research,
tutte le attività che uno può riesce
with the different activities we may be engaged in. And Parent Project should get all our cooperation because they're always on our side. We are hopeful. I think we should all be.
Allora ecco, vorrei ringraziare anche Roberto Zoffoli.
Let me thank Roberto Zoffoli for being so good at editing this video. So, we've been listening to how emotional it is to receive a DMD diagnosis. It very much changes the parents' expectations vis-a-vis their son. It is an unforgettable time when anxiety, powerlessness, and anger are all together. As Miria said, I felt like the world was falling at my feet. Roberta said, we were really going through very dark times. Even the couple of husband and wife must come to terms with the new situation. But if, as Miria said, one helps the other, well, then one can move along together, getting reorganized and catching up that sense of normality that seemed to have gone lost. Just before the diagnosis, there were expectations about one's son. But now Miria said Valentino is always smiling. And basically, she describes her son based on his normal characteristics, which speaks for the time for the accepting time in this family's life. So now they are all trying to face and solve real problems, including treatments. And of course, all family members try to encourage each other through self-esteem. As Miria said, yes, I know we can make it. Francesco said one should never give up. Well, as we know, adaptation is influenced by the way the diagnosis is communicated. If that is clear enough, then one can better go through the processing of that piece of information. The clinician must respect the other, thereby allowing the family to feel welcome. As Dr. D'Amico said, by the way, it is a hard time for clinicians too. She said, I can remember every single time I have had to communicate such diagnosis, also considering the lack of any relevant training. And you feel inadequate. great at the beginning, but then with time, you come up with your own method based on experience, on training, and on the knowledge of that particular disease, which allows clinicians to better be on the side of the families and give them advice. So this is really the first time families may feel the sympathy of someone else. And of course, this also paves the way to a trust-based relationship with physicians. It is the time when the very first relationship between clinicians and families and patients, of course, is set up. So, you know, when the time of treatments comes up, then of course this must also be communicated to the boy and their siblings in particular. Many parents find it hard to do so, to communicate to their children, with their children, which may engender a vicious circle because the parents are afraid of talking to their children. Such mystery triggers negative fantasies in the children that are considered by the parents as a form of unease. So the children just shut up because they don't want their parents to feel sorry and to be sorry for them. It's a sort of a protection mechanism that is triggered, hence the relevance of realizing that nothing is more exogenous than the worst imagination in real life. So the child should be given information, but also one should share such data with him, thereby reducing confusion and fear and developing a stronger sense of security and self-confidence, and also confidence in other people, especially their parents. There's no a single way to do so, but we need to try and engage in a dialogue that is reassuring and empathetic by respecting the child's timing. Information, therefore, should be simple and clear without any useless anticipation.
Favorevole utilizzare termini quali difficoltà e problema.
You must use terms such as difficulty or problem. Of course, being always willing to answer the questions the child might ask. But even if the child or the siblings don't ask questions, still they feel something. Francesco told us, I know very well what I have, what I can do and what I can't do. I mean, clearly has always had a very open dialogue with his parents. I was not scared. I wanted to know more because I wanted to understand. The information enabled him to understand what was going on and why he had to follow some treatments. And discovering the importance of such treatments, he has become an active actor in his therapy. So he told us, well, I remind sometimes my parents I have to take a tablet. It is a limitation, but it's not lived as such. He told us, I know there are some things I cannot possibly do because I haven't got enough strength. Francesco feels it as a problem that can be faced to achieve one's dreams, really climbing his own mountain. If I do my best, I can overcome my problems. One should never be depressed. And Francesco tells us how important it is to lever on the most functional part of yourself, so the brain rather than the muscles. So one can overcome one's condition and difficulties while exploiting one's own resources. And Roberta told us how some moments were really unforgettable. She immediately noticed that that something different was happening in her family, of sorrow and pain. The balance of the family itself, the equilibrium of the family was changing. That is why it's also very important to speak with the siblings, providing explanations that can give a meaning of what they are observing and living through, so as to understand why the brother needs more attention, thus generating over time a change that will lead siblings also to a new normality, a greater sensitivity, and that will determine what you are going to be as an adult. Considering the complexity of the situation, sharing and a dialogue with a specialist is always very important, because this person can support parents and devising specific strategies for sharing the information, and also the different evolutionary developmental phases in which the boys are in. As Miriam told us many times, well, it is essential to speak and speak again. So sharing precisely to reduce the emotional load, because the emotional load might be too difficult to stand. So gradually the family learns how to live with this new problem, anxiety, and this feeling of helplessness will turn into acceptance. Well, today, many strategies have been suggested: speaking, look for support, investing in leisure time, in sports, and also faith. All is headed towards this search for normality, moving forward, believing in it, never give up, communicating, sharing, togetherness. These are the main words used by the protagonist of this experience. These are essential to face Duchenne and the road you have in front of you. And now I wish to thank the protagonists of this session, who today are here with us: Miriam, Francesco, Roberta, and Dr. D'Amico.
Vorrei ringraziarli perché
I'd like to thank them because they have really communicated a very important message through their words.
adesso vediamo che la dottoressa ci saluta in chat.
Well, Dr. D'Amico is saying hello from the chat. Now we have the faces of our protagonists: Francesco with his mother, Dr. D'Amico. I don't know if Miriam and Roberta are also there in front of their videos. Francesco, would you like to say something more? Well, Francesco was really brilliant. He answered to everything. Thank you. No, we are trying to get in touch also to have the videos also of the other participants. Francesco, you were absolutely awesome. I mean, he's a philosopher. This young man is a philosopher. He's climbing his mountain. This is a metaphor I've just decided to use. You are receiving a lot of a lot of nice things, of congratulations are being sent through the chat, both from your from other boys, but also from parents. Let's see if we can have the videos also of the other participants. Is there any question? Anyone else who would like to take the floor, would like to share with us? Francesco, they are telling you you're a myth. Yes, I'm reading it. I'm fine. I'm reading the chat. There they are. Well, Valentino's there with mom and dad, and Miriam as well, Good evening.
Senti Francesco, c'è chi chiede che ti
Francesco,
ballare, vogliono che torni a ballare.
some people are asking you news about your experience as a dancer. Well, dancing is over. But I mean, doesn't mean that is something I've forgotten. You know, with COVID, you know, now dancing is sort of difficult. So I gave up. And because also it was very tiring. I wanted to rest a while. But I still keep dancing. When I hear the music, I dance and have a great time. So I've never stopped. As for sports, well, I've given up. Today, my sister goes swimming. Now she goes, I mean, she does both, dancing and swimming, my little sister. But I'm glad she does, at least. I'm not dancing, but at least she is, at least in the family there is someone doing it. You are concentrating on the books. Well, we know you are a very good student. Roberta is there as well. Roberta is here.
Non so se ci sono domande.
I don't know if there are questions. Well, there are people who say hello to all of you, to Valentino and his family.
Una cosa a Francesco, perché noi dopo questi giorni di studio televisivo.
After these days of TV studio, we are considering creating a parent TV. So we have taken the titles of your interventions as titles for our shows. So we are already building, a sort of framework for our future TV. So get ready, because we want you among our anchormen. I think Francesco would like to do that. Yes. Maybe I meet someone there. Who knows? Well, I'm in love with Mrs. De Filippi. I'm in love with her. So I've never tried, but I might like doing it. Well, would be worth a try.
Me lo sarei aspettato che sarei arrivato. Io volevo comunque che mi conoscevano tutti, quindi se faccio
I really wanted everybody to get to know me, so I'm ready. You're certainly ready. You'll have an increase in the number of followers, I'm sure. Pretty sure of that.
Una cosa che vorrei dire anche rispetto la comunicazione, la diagnosi. Oggi abbiamo
Today we have spoken about the communication of the diagnosis. It is very important to speak and to share. Today, people keep talking about trials, and you heard, I mean, rather, there was a video to support families in choosing to participate in a trial, and it is very important to speak to the child beforehand, before he participates in the trial, and informing the child of all the different stages of the trial, so that the child is made aware of what is going on, because only by doing that he can really follow the phases of the trial. When well, I want to remind that when the children participate in a clinical trial, even the children sign a consent that is not truly an informed consent, but anyway, their opinion is taken into account. There are lots of nice words coming along. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Well, if there are no questions or contributions, I think we can thank you all. The experiment that has been going on for years, Grazia, Dr. D'Amico, and the whole team of Bambin Gesù Hospital. I mean, they've all participated in the information about diagnosis together with our psychologists of the listening center. Well, that has enabled Parent Project to be close to the families from the very start. And this is something we have heard also from what Miriam said, because I mean, this was a real success in the story of Parent Project, because Parent Project was born, was created with a communication of diagnosis that back then was quite different from what is going on today, and being really able to cooperate, as is the case with Adele, well, that is something of paramount importance for our association and also for our families. So thank you. Thank you very much indeed, because of course it is not so simple everywhere, but certainly it is one of the goals we are working on. And the storytelling of today, well, confirm that when this cooperation works, also the experience of the families is completely different. And I believe this is truly, truly very important. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I mean, we are all together in supporting the families and parents, of course. Thank Parent Project. Well, yes. Yes, yes. I just want to thank Manuela for the psychological support. We can hear you, but not see you. Well, here I am. Here I am. Here I am, though. And I wish to thank Parent Project. Valentino is saying something, but unfortunately he's off microphone. We can't hear him. Well, for us, Parent Project made really a big difference. Francesco is 12, and many years ago, well, there was no right way to communicate the diagnosis, but now that I go to the clinic, there is always a person who really accompanies us also in the corridor, asking us, how are you doing? 12 years ago, it was far more complicated. Of course, the doctor must be very, very good at communicating things, but also the people who are supporting us at home and also people who are supporting us at the clinic. Also, while you are waiting, also in the waiting rooms, I wish to thank. So we hope that you all get vaccines and you come back and that you can come back. Bye. 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 Throw me a kiss.
Che in questi anni abbiamo fatto un percorso insieme.
So actually, we have gone a long way. We as members of the Counseling Center feel like we have really gone a long way thanks to the cooperation with the physicians, but also with the boys and their families, because they have really told us which direction we should go to. Francesco is well aware of his situation, but of course this does not always go like that. And we try to adjust to the single conditions and to that respect, you parents are on our side. I would also like to say hi to the other mom. We may have never met, but all the best, all the best. Also to the other moms, I fully agree with what she has said. We need to be as light as possible, in dealing with our sons, because they are there for us to be proud of them, and sometimes we're not expecting that. We have mainly motor expectations, but they satisfy many more expectations. I'm often amazed at what this boy here can give me. So sometimes there are added values to be considered. Of course, there are deficits, but they are perfectly made up for. So I am proud of my son, of what he can do. I'd love to have just a bit of his charisma. And don't get nervous, because it's true. It's true. I can see Valentino is a very, very young boy, but you'll see. He'll be like that soon. And I'd like to say to the moms who are listening, don't give up, never give up. There may not be one way for all of our sons, but sometimes it is from the darkest hours that the greatest potentialities come up. I remember we had, we did have a problem like this with Francesco. He had to undergo surgery in his spine because he had fallen over. We don't really know why that had happened, but again, we should never say stop, we're perfectly fine now. So I might add that sometimes my pain aches because I keep thinking of that, I keep thinking that my pain is aching. So, sometimes it was just in my head, it was just in my mind. But actually, you were actually suffering, Dr. D'Amico was there. Yes, but I felt like most of it came from my mind, not from my body. And I seem to be getting better now. But I must learn how to stand up, from the sitting position on the ground. Well, if I remember correctly, we tried that when you came to see me at the hospital, right? Yes. Well, I certainly feel stronger now. I feel like I've just overcome that obstacle, so it's now time I should keep going.
Grazie a tutti.
Okay, so thank you again. Thank you all. Thanks for this beautiful video. Thank you. Thank you all for participating. There's Dad too. There's Dad. Yes. Hi, Mirko. We're all here. I'd like to thank Roberta too, and all siblings, you know, all our patients' siblings. Actually, we did have a session dedicated to siblings, and believe me, this is something that is very dear to the people in our counseling center. So we are almost done. This is day 3 of our 18th International Conference, and we have kept the time schedule. We're supposed to close at 8. We are actually closing even earlier than that. But tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, we're going to start in the morning. So let's meet tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. You know, this is actually like a TV studio. So this is why we may not, we can be here without wearing a mask because we get tested every day. So please be assured of that. And then if you visit our website, you will find the recordings of all day 1. I believe that later tonight, you'll also get the recordings of all presentations from day 2, but you can already have access to them via Facebook in Italian and in English. You can visit YouTube. So in case you've missed some parts, you can have access to all these media. So we are very happy for this session. It was great and very moving. Well, from the TV studio, we are obviously finding it very exciting, but of course it's not like meeting you all in person. Anyway, I wish to thank the staff members. We are always involved in all sessions. So thank you. Thanks to the sound engineers. Thanks to all participants and speakers. And thanks to the interpreters who thank the chairwoman. See you tomorrow morning. Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Vuoi fare ciao mamma? No.